What a strange day Good Friday is. People must look at churches and go, why would so many people gather in a room to celebrate death in its most brutal form? How strange it must look. Why do we do this? Why do people step forward and light a candle in worship? Worshipping a Messiah bleeding, dying, and tears and screams. Why does this happen? Perhaps let me start this morning with a story through the eyes of a lady by the name of Linda Strom. Linda Strom is a prison chaplain. And she was a prison chaplain. She's in the United States. She was a prison chaplain to a certain inmate by the name of Carla Faye Tucker. Some of you may be familiar with that name. She was famous for being the first woman to receive capital punishment in the state of Texas in 100 years. It had been 100 years prior to her that a female inmate was on death row. But something happened while she was awaiting her sentence to be carried out. Carla Faye had a remarkable experience of the Lord Jesus Christ. She met her in an extraordinary way. And we don't have time this morning to delve into her testimony, but it's worth reading. And she was transformed. And she began to minister, to evangelize the other prisoners, even the prison staff, the other wardens. She talked with them. She would sit at her cell and they would sit outside her cell and she would pray for them. She ran Bible studies to the point where she became the prison pastor. Not only to the other inmates, but also to the staff. And Linda, who's telling the story, her chaplain, she mentions that in the end, Carla was so filled with the Spirit that she became her spiritual advisor. And Carla became such a loved and valued member of the prison community that other prison staff supported Linda in her repeated attempts to have Carla Faye's sentence downgraded to life imprisonment. But unfortunately, it was no use. Linda realised that in spite of who Carla now was, in spite of that transformation, the law is the law and justice must be satisfied. And so on the 3rd of February 1998, with her last breath, having received the injection and a smile on her face, Carla Faye Tucker uttered these last words, and I read them to you now. I am so sorry. I hope God will give you all peace with this. Everyone has been so good to me. I love you all very much, but I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Braggett, I thank you for what you've done. You've been so good to me. I love all of you very, very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will be waiting for you. Linda said, as she recounts this, that through her death, Carla Faye's legacy transformed. And no prison officer that was there that day ever remembered her for her crimes, but for her transformed life and the way that she died. For her extraordinary last words. You see, these hardened prison officers in the state of Texas, their lives were changed by being with Carla through her entire journey with Jesus. But I want to say this morning that the impact of Carla's death is nothing in comparison to the impact that has been made by the death that we commemorate today, the death of Jesus. In fact, it is the fact of Jesus' death that transformed Carla Faye's life and her journey from a journey of dread to peace and embrace of eternity. Jesus' death has the power to compel others to step into a completely new understanding of what life is all about. I want to ask you this morning, have you stepped into a new understanding of what life is all about? Is the word eternity a fearful word or a hopeful word for you? And then we read this in Mark 15:39. When the centurion who stood there in front of Jesus heard his cry and he saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God." I've always wondered how that centurion felt as he stood there after hearing the screams, watching the sorrow and love flow mingled down. But who is this centurion? That's the question I want to ask this morning very quickly. Who is this centurion? Well, if you trace Mark's account very carefully, it reveals a close resonance with extra-biblical records of Roman crucifixions. We don't have the time, and sometimes it's not even appropriate to go into all the details now. But to put it very in short, the condemned prisoner was completely and utterly at the non-existent mercy of the Roman military. They were turned over to the soldiers after they were condemned. I don't know if you know this, but the Roman army was not known for its compassion. It was not famous for its mercy. And we read a little bit earlier in Mark 15, verse 16, it says, "The soldiers led away Jesus into the palace." That is the praetorium. So he's in the care of the soldiers now. The soldiers are leading him away. And together, listen to this, with the whole company of soldiers. What does that mean? The actual Roman word for a company was a cohort. And within every cohort, there were 6 centuries. You probably guess what that means. A century is 80 to 100 men. And centurions were the commanders of a century. And so you're looking at probably 5 to 6 centurions overseeing an entire cohort. Bear in mind, therefore, that Jesus in his ordeal is not being slapped around, beaten, spat on and abused by 3 or 4 or 5 soldiers. Try upwards of 580. They went and they got the whole company of soldiers. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat, and there's been not very many, 1 or 2 occasions in my life where it's been on a dark street and I've realised that I've been outnumbered, and I'm thinking, I hope these people are nice people. But how terrifying would it be to be alone in the face of 580 Roman soldiers? The last, by the way, that is the last reference to the specific number in Mark 15. From now on, Mark just uses the word they. They. Why am I telling you all of this? Here's why. Think about our lone centurion standing at the base of the cross. Let's ask ourselves this morning, what's been his journey over the past 6 hours? Well, he's one of the centurions in this company. What's he been doing these last 6 hours before the crucifixion? Well, I'll tell you what his journey is. This is his journey. The beating, the scourging, the mocking, the scorning of Jesus. He is part of it. He is an enemy of Jesus, if you like. Not only is he part of it, at times he may have issued the command. At very least, stood idly by while the soldiers under his command did it. As an officer, he has overseen the placing of the cross on Jesus' soldiers. He's overseen the placing of the crown of thorns on his head. He's overseen the pulling of Simon of Cyrene from the crowd. He's overseen the nailing of 2 other criminals to the left and to the right of Jesus. He's heard the insults hurled at Jesus from the crowd, from the other criminal, from his own soldiers, and maybe he's even hurled a few himself. But there's just one other thing, and that's this: that in every instance on that fateful day, he has been within earshot of Jesus' response to all of that. He has heard Jesus' response. Because it says, Mark says, not just when he looks up at the cross and he saw how he died. Well, that death has been a long process, folks. That's not just the last 5 minutes. When he saw how Jesus died, he's been probably no more than 6 feet away from most of Jesus' responses, and that has changed him. And before I close, I want to pull out some thoughts for our application today. Number 1, please remember, he saw it all and it changed him. By virtue of his role in our story, he saw it all. Why did he see it all? He had to. He was doing his job. He's a soldier. That's his job. He was under orders. I mean, Roman soldiers aren't squeamish, but even if he was, he couldn't just tap out. He is on duty, at least till the 9th hour, when the last nail goes in. And I want to say this morning that we are at far, far greater risk. We can leave the scene at any point. We're not under orders. We can tap out at any time. You can pull out your phone right now and check Facebook if you really want to. Don't do that. But if you really wanted to, you could. It is so wonderful that you're here. You know why? Because you don't have to be here. You're not under orders. We can tap out at any point. We can choose to daydream. We can choose to focus on whatever we want. And so we risk moving from this place prior to the 6th hour and never giving these things another thought. We live with the greatest possible risk at Easter time. What's that? It's to wake up the next morning unchanged and unmoved. And so I ask you, how will you mitigate that risk today? Maybe it's setting a little alarm on your phone for 3 o'clock this afternoon to just say a silent prayer. Thank you, Lord. Thank you. How will you mitigate this risk of moving on too quickly? My point this morning, friends, is we have to dwell here. We have to be in the shoes of the centurion. We have to be willing to see it all, because those prison wardens, they were changed because they walked the whole journey of Carla Faye's life, and that is nothing compared to these Roman soldiers, this centurion, he walked with Jesus for these 6 hours and it changed him. He's seen it all. And that second point, it's how that matters. Good Friday, it's not about remembering or proclaiming the fact of the cross. That's part of it. But how Jesus died. Because plenty of people die on crosses in the first century. Thousands of people were crucified. Isn't that awful? Can you imagine that? Thousands of people. But no one died like this. Your legacy is sealed by how you die. This centurion has overseen literally hundreds, if not thousands, of individual crucifixions, and by his own count, none of them were like this. None of them were like this. Mark is saying to his audience, you can say, if you like, that Jesus is nothing special, but here is a bloke who has probably forgotten more about effective crucifixion and the execution of political prisoners than we'll ever be able to learn in a lifetime. And it's this guy who's convinced that this one was different. And so on what grounds are we going to stand on to tell him that he's mistaken? This one was different, says the centurion. Thirdly, lastly, the Via Dolorosa, the way of suffering. The challenge this morning is to continue the journey that you made this morning when you walked up the front here and lit that candle. Will you continue the centurion's journey? Will you walk in his shoes? Notice the deliberate irony in Mark's gospel. Jesus' friends, his literal followers, they fled, they're gone. And his every footstep now is accompanied by his enemies, so to speak. But here's the point. Even an enemy who journeys with Jesus on the way of the cross will be transformed into a worshipper. There may be someone here today listening in online because that's just what you do here at this time of the year. It's Good Friday, better go to church. Maybe you're here because a family member brought you along. Maybe you just flat out can't wait to get out of here. Or maybe your New Year's resolution for more holiness 3 months ago has already fallen apart and you feel far off and you feel distant from God. Maybe you even feel like an enemy of God. But I dare you, whatever situation you're in, walk in his shoes, go on the centurion's journey, get some time today, just open the Bible, read the whole thing. You don't have a Bible, we got some down the back. Roll it around in your mind's eye. Walk with him. Walk up that hill. I dare you to see yourself hammering in those nails and look up at him bleeding, dying for you. For you. We step into a new understanding of Jesus when we see how he dies. And this morning, as we've seen, we have a first step. We have a way that you can respond. It's going to invite Don up and also our home teams to just lead us through a time of communion. You can respond in this way. Thanks, Don.